This is the Vicky May 3 bag, and on this sewing tutorial I'm going to show you how to make it step by step. The Vicky May actually has 3 different front pocket options as well as lots of features to it. If you're curious on the other pattern options, check out the comparison video which you can find linked on the screen right now and in the description. So let's jump right in. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is to download the pattern and cut out the pattern pieces. And you can find all the information for the pattern in the description below. Once you've cut out all your pattern pieces, you're going to interface them and then cut them out of your fabric. And then we need to think about the stabilizer. So I've cut out all my pattern pieces and I've interfaced them, and then these ones need to have stabilizer added to them. So the first one you're going to think about is your zipper panel, and that is pattern piece 9. You're going to have your 2 lining pieces which do not have stabilizer but they are interfaced, and then you're going to have your 2 outer pieces which do have stabilizer added. I'm using a combination of sew-in and fusible foam in this project. This one is fusible, as you can see. I always interface first so that the foam can stick to it a little bit better, and as you can see I have placed it out of the seam allowance where possible. On all the pattern pieces as well, you can see that there are the seam allowance lines added so that you can cut them down or fold them under to cut out your stabilizer if you're using fusible. So that's pattern piece 9. Then we have pattern piece 10, which is our gusset, and we have got 1 in outer and 1 in lining, both interfaced, and then there's stabilizer added to the outer. For this tutorial I am using this water resistant canvas for the outer, I'm using a quilting cotton for the lining, and then I'm also mixing up on the outer and I'm using a faux leather too. So when it comes to pattern piece 12, we're going to have 2 cut in our lining, interfaced of course, and then we're going to have 2 cut in our outer. Like I say, I'm using faux leather for my outer. For this one I have used sew-in foam. If you don't know how to do sew-in foam or you're curious about it, you can find a link in the description for a video showing you how to attach this, because it's a little bit different to the fusible. Once you've added all your stabilizer, you're also going to want to cut out and prep your 2 zippers. We have one for the top of the bag, which is the longer one, and I've added 2 zipper pulls to this facing each other. I've also fused the ends of all my zippers too. We've then got a smaller one which is for our lining, and again I've fused the ends and I've put a zipper pull on. You're going to want to cut and press 2 widths of bias binding. You could buy this pre-made if you want to. You're going to need around 180 centimeters or 2 lengths of 90 centimeters. And that is around about 71 inches all the way along. I have used a bias tape maker to make these and press them. You do want to have it so that they are cut on the bias so that they have enough stretch to go around the curves of the bag. Also for this project you're obviously going to need some hardware and some tools. So you're going to need 2 1-inch D-rings. You're going to need a slider for your strap. Depending on the width of your webbing or how you make your strap depends on the width. You're going to need 2 lobster clasps, same as the slider, depending on the width of your strap. I'm not going to show you in this tutorial how to make a strap, but I have included a couple of tutorials below in the description in case you would like some help with making your own strap. You're also going to need some double capped rivets. I am using 8mm by 8mm double cap rivets for this project. Along the way we're going to be using a Microtex needle in our machine. You will see me use a Teflon foot, but also a walking foot is really great too. I'm going to be using a zipper foot for getting around those curves when we get to it. Also going to be needing a friction pen or a marking pen of some kind. I'm going to be using double-sided tape. I like to use 5mm and 3mm. Double-sided tape. Obviously you're going to use some form of measuring for when we get to different parts. Also going to be using different size scissors. I'm going to be using some pinking shears as well as we go along, as you will see when we get to it, but you don't have to have those if you don't have them. Okay, so let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with our strap connectors. So we're going to take one of those and I'm just going to mark a line down the middle. As you can see, I have interfaced the back of this already. Then I'm going to fold each long edge in to meet that line. You can use double-sided tape in the middle if you would like to. Double-sided tape for this does help to keep it really accurate, and it means you can get really close without having to add loads of clips. Then I'm going to stitch along each edge with a top stitch. So for this project I am going to do a 4 stitch length for my top stitching, and I'm going to do a 3 for all my structural seams, and that is because I'm using a combination of faux leather and this water resistant canvas. But for the lining I'm going to be using a 2.5 stitch length for the structural seams. Okay, so I have repeated that with the other one and I've got my 2 connector straps. I'm going to place a D-ring onto each one and pop a clip on. Then I'm going to put a zipper foot on my machine and I'm going to stitch as close as I can to those D-rings to really secure them in place. Okay, so we're going to start off with our front slip pocket, and that is pattern piece 1, front slip pocket D. And if you're wondering why that is pocket D, there are 3 different options to this pattern, and they all the pattern pieces correlate together. So to avoid confusion, I have labelled the 4 different pocket options as letters. So that explains that. Okay, so we're going to fold it. You're going to have cut it on the fold so that you have got the height, and we're going to fold it in half, wrong sides together, matching up that bottom curved edge. I'm going to pop some clips in just to keep it together. If you're using quilting cotton, then you can give that a nice press. This option is really good for beginners because it doesn't have as much bulk, and it's great for using quilting cotton too. So I'm going to decide on the front. I think this is going to be my front. I'm going to top stitch along that top edge 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and I'm going to use a 3.5 top stitch length for all my top stitching, and the rest of my bag construction I'm going to use a 2.5 for all the inside linings because I'm using a quilting cotton, and all my outside seams I'm going to be using a stitch length of 3. Okay, so with that fold top stitched, I'm then going to baste all the way around that bottom half to keep it all together. So I'm going to extend my stitch length up to a stitch length of 6. And I'm stitching within the seam allowance, so around about 1/2 centimetre or 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so with that sewn up, we're then going to grab pattern piece 12, our front panel 1, and we're going to place that so that it is the wrong side of the pocket down to the right side of pattern piece 12, and we're going to clip and baste within the seam allowance going all the way around those bottom 3 sides. And it's worth noting that when I sew this, I sew from each side going down to the middle. This is going to help avoid any kind of slipping or pushing of the fabric so that you end up with a wonky edge with one side higher than the other. And again, we're basting within the seam allowance, so around about 1/2 centimetre, and I'm doing this on a longer stitch length of around 6. Okay, so that's the front slip pocket completed. Then we're going to move on to the optional handle. So for this, we're going to need pattern piece 16. And just like before, we're going to make a line all the way down the middle. And we did this for our strap connectors. So we're going to fold the 2 long edges in, and then we're going to fold it again. Now, if you're using a non-fraying fabric like a faux leather for your optional handle, then you can just leave it there and stitch along the long edge. I'm obviously using fabric that frays quite easily, so I'm going to show you how to encase the raw edges. If you're using faux leather, you can also put edge coat on each short end to finish it off, or leave it raw. So I'm going to turn it so that it is right sides together, and I'm going to fold, do a little finger press on one of the short edges, and I'm going to fold it up to meet that fold line, and I'm going to do the same on the other side so that it looks like that. Pop a clip on the end, and I'm going to do the same with the other side. So fold it right sides together, fold up that edge, fold up the other side, pop a clip in, and then I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance along each short edge. So now, because we're going to turn it the other way out, we need to just get rid of some of that bulk. So I'm going to cut away some triangles from the corners, and I'm also going to put my scissors through and cut away one side so that it's lower than the other, so it's less bulk in that seam. Then I'm going to turn it, flip it so that it's the right way out. Push out that corner. And you see that it kind of wants to fold in. I'm going to put some double-sided in the middle there. If you are using quilting cotton, you can just give this a nice press to get it all to fold in, ready for sewing. I'm going to use the trusty double-sided tape. Pop some clips in. Now, if you are going to rivet the handle in place without stitching it to the back panel, you can totally do that. You may find that it swivels a little bit. That could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing, depending on preference. I am going to stitch this one in place, and then I'll show you how to rivet it if you want to do that option too. You can skip ahead at any time during this video using the timestamps below. But for this one, I'm going to stitch this in place, like I say, so I'm just going to stitch along the top and the bottom at this point. I always stitch the bottom opening first, the one that's open, to completely encase that. And I'm doing a 4 stitch length to go with the rest of my top stitching. Okay, now we're going to attach it to our back panel, which is pattern piece 12, and we are going to have it centered. So I'm just going to find the middle of that strap, pop a little mark. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pop a pin in instead, because then I don't need to make too much of a mark. And I'm going to find the middle. I thought I had marked it, but I haven't. And I'm going to pop a pin in that one too. Even though it's faux leather, it's way in the seam allowance, so you're never going to see it. Then I'm going to mark down 1.5 inches. Make a little mark with the friction pen. That's going to come off pretty soon. Pretty easily, I should say. Find which is the nicer front. I think this is the nicer front. Usually the underneath is a bit nicer. You can see that the front is slightly overhanging on that bottom edge. So I'm going to place that there, and I'm going to use some double-sided to hold that in place on each end. Because of course As I'm using faux leather, I can't put any pins in. Next, I'm going to sew a little box around each end to secure that to the back panel. Pull the threads to the back and tie them off. Now you can of course stitch it and add a rivet, totally up to you. So I'm going to pop a little rivet in there just to finish it off, but I wanted to show you if you're just stitching it. I like to add some Decaville light to the back of the rivets just to help give it a little bit of strength. So I've just cut out two little kind of rounded rectangles to place behind the rivets for extra strength. If you are choosing to do your handle so that it is just riveted on, then you're going to want to stitch all the way around your rectangle like so, and then you're going to place it on in the same manner. So we're going to place it 1.5 inches from that top edge. Find the center of the handle and the center of that pattern piece 12. Going to add some double-sided tape to each end. Going to punch the holes and then add a rivet in at each end. I'm just cutting out some kind of rounded cornered rectangles to go behind the rivets for extra security, and I'm using Decaville light for that. Okay, so we're going to put that to one side. Next up, we're going to make the inside slip pockets. So we're going to grab our pattern piece 13 and one of our pattern piece 12s. And our pattern piece 13, we're going to place it so that it is wrong sides together, matching up those curved edges. And then we're going to give it a press along that fold, and we're going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch from that top edge. Then we're going to place that part that we've just stitched, pattern piece 13, on top of one of pattern piece 12, which is the main panel. I'm going to clip that in place, matching up the bottom curves of that slip pocket we've just stitched with the bottom of pattern piece 12. Now we need to make a mark down the middle. So one way that I quite like to do this is just to fold and match up those edges and give that a bit of a finger press to find the middle. Got the middle there. Then we can use our ruler to make our line. Just marking on pattern piece 13. It's subtle, but I can see it there. Then we're going to baste around the edge, those sort of two sides and the bottom edge, and we're going to stitch up that middle. Now we're basting with a long stitch length, and then we're stitching up the middle with a 2.5 or 3 stitch length. It is like a top stitch. It's going to be seen, if you like, even though it's inside the bag. But because it is structural, I'm going to use not going to use a 4 stitch length, I'm going to use a 3 just to make it a little bit stronger. Now when you're basting from around this edge, what I like to do is start each top edge and then meet in the middle. This stops the whole thing from kind of moving and wiggling and pushing up, and then you end up with 2 wonky edges on the sides. So it's a little bit of a tip. Okay, now that's stitched up, we're going to put that to one side and we're going to make the inside zipper pocket. So for the inside zipper pocket, we're going to need pattern piece 14, we're going to need pattern piece 12, and we're going to need our inside zipper with, of course, our pull attached. And I've fused the ends of my zipper already. So we're going to lay pattern piece 14 face down onto the top of pattern piece 12, which is face up, so they're right sides together. We're going to find the middle of 14 and the middle of 12. I like to just do a little finger press for that. And pattern piece 14 needs to be 2 centimeters lower than the top edge of 12, and that is 13/16 of an inch. Then we're going to mark a rectangle onto the back, and our rectangle needs to be 1.5 centimeters lower than the edge of pattern piece 14, and it's going to be a 1 centimeter rectangle, 1 centimeter in height. 1.5 centimeters is also 9/16 inch down from the top of pattern piece 14, and it is going to be 17 centimeters or 6 11/16 of an inch wide. So with that marked on, we're going to take that to the machine and stitch all the way around, but I'm going to show you a little trick as we go. So I'm stitching with a 2.5 stitch length, and I'm going to just start as normal. I always start in the middle. As I get about, I don't know, centimetre from the edge, doesn't really matter exactly, but I get close to the edge, I'm going to go down to 1.5 stitch length. This is going to help me get right onto that corner. I'm going to lift the foot and pivot, stitch with a 1.5 again, lift the foot and pivot again, stitch with 1.5 for about a centimetre, and then I'm going to switch it up to a 2.5 all the way to the other bottom corner and repeat the process. And that is the perfect time for the bobbin to run out. This is also a reminder to change your needle. I haven't changed mine in a while. I can feel the machine is getting sluggish, so I'm going to go ahead and do that too. Okay, now we're going to cut along the middle and we're going to do 2 forks on each end. And the trick here is that you want to get it as close as you can to those stitches without the stitches being broken. Then we're going to push the zipper pocket panel, all the way through to the back. And here you want to wiggle the fibres so that you're pushing it right into those corners. Don't be afraid to really pull it so that you get those really crisp, nice corners. Then I'm going to go ahead and give that a quick press so that we can put our zipper in. Okay, with that pressed, I'm going to grab my double-sided tape and I'm going to lay some down on each long edge of my zipper. Then I'm going to lay the opening that we have just sewn, I'm going to open that a little bit, on top with the zipper lined up, the edges lined up with the edges of pattern piece 14, the zipper pocket which has been pushed through to the back. And we can give that a little wiggle around so that it's even top to bottom as well. Okay, now we're going to stitch that all the way around with a 4 stitch length. Okay, so with that stitched on, we're then going to flip the whole thing over and we're going to put the pattern piece 14, the zipper pocket panel, up to meet itself along that top edge. I'm going to pop some clips along those 3 edges and then we're going to stitch from the bottom corner going up, across and down the other side. You may find it useful to use a zipper foot at this point because it helps to get it a bit closer. And we're sewing this with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, with that all stitched up, we're going to pop that to one side and we're going to work on the zipper panel. So for the zipper panel, we're going to need pattern piece 9. We're going to need the outers and the 2 linings. And then we're also going to need our main zipper with 2 pulls attached, and I've fused the ends. You can of course just put 1 pull on the top, but I do find it makes for an easier to use bag with the 2 pulls. I'm going to be using double-sided tape again as well. So I'm going to pop the lining to one side for a second. And we're going to place some double-sided tape along that long edge. We're going to place our zipper right side down along that top edge. Now at this point you can baste along that edge, or if you're like me and you just want to get into it, you can then put some more double-sided tape and then you're going to put the lining face down on top. Then we're going to stitch that with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to repeat that on the other side with the other outer and lining. But before I do that, I'm just going to add some clips just to keep that out of the way while I do that. Now I'm going to top stitch along each long edge next to the zipper, about 2 millimeters or about 1/8 inch from the edge. With the zipper panel made up, we're then going to grab our strap connectors that we made earlier and we're going to place them so that they are centered at the end of the zipper on each end. And we want to have an overhang of around about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters with the strap connector going over the end of the zipper panel. Clip that in place and do the same on the other end. Then I'm going to baste those 2 pieces in place. making sure that it's within the 1 centimetre seam allowance. So with those basted in place, we're then going to grab our pattern piece 10 gusset or outer, and we're going to lay that right side down. I'm going to clip that to that short edge on each end. And we're then going to baste that in place with a long stitch length. And we're basting it within the seam allowance, so about 1/2 centimetre or about 1/4 inch. You may find you need a hump jumper going over those strap connectors as well. Then we're going to flip the whole thing over, and we're going to place our lining right side together on the back of that zipper. Same thing, clip in place along those short edges. This time we're going to stitch with a 1 centimetre seam allowance along those 2 edges. Now, if you're having trouble going through all of these layers, you can use a hump jumper, and also you could go up to a 110 jeans needle. You could also use a zipper foot to get closer to that D-ring. Then we're going to flip the whole thing so that it is right sides out. And we're going to top stitch along those edges where the strap connectors and the zippers are. And we're also going to baste the whole thing together. So we're basting along the long edges of the gusset and the long edges of the zipper panel, so that we've got one cohesive loop with the lining and the outer wrong sides together. But before you stitch that in place, you need to think about if you're going to have your rivet on the inside, showing on the inside, or if you want it sandwiched in the lining. If you want it sandwiched in the lining, you're going to need to do your top stitch on each short edge first and then place your rivet. If you don't mind, you can do the top stitching, the basting, and then you can do your rivets after, which is how I'm going to do it. Okay, so with that all stitched up, I'm now going to place my rivets. So I'm going to place them about 1 centimetre down from that strap edge and in the centre of the strap. And of course, I'm going to do them on both strap connectors. Okay, so now we are going to attach our front slip pocket that we made before and our lining slip pockets. And we're going to place them so that they are wrong sides together. I'm going to clip around the edge and then I'm going to baste within the seam allowance, so around about 1/2 centimetre all the way around. Be sure that you have both slip pockets facing the same way, of course, as well. And we're going to do the same with the back panel. So wrong sides together, clip all the way around and then baste within the seam allowance. Okay, so now we're going to sew the front and the back panel together with the gusset. So we're going to start with the front. I'm going to place it right side up and I'm going to mark the middle at the top and the bottom and the two sides. I'm just putting a pin in the seam allowance and we're going to have the gusset so that it is wrong side out. So we're matching up the top, the side, the bottom and the other side. And of course we want to make sure that the zipper is at the top where the slip pocket opening is. Now, once you've done the main parts of the bag, clipped it on, you're going to think that it just doesn't fit. And how are you going to get that gusset in to fit with that main panel? So we're going to snip into the gusset around about 1/2 centimetre. So we're not cutting too far in, but we just want to cut it so that it has a little bit of give within that seam allowance. Don't worry if you cut into the basting stitches, it's still going to be okay. And hopefully you can see that that has really opened it up and I'm going to be able to get that to meet that outer panel. So I'm going to do that on all the 4 corners. Okay, so now you can see that's all clipped. It all fits in with those little snips on the gusset. I'm going to take it over to the machine and I'm going to sew this with a 1 centimetre seam allowance or 3/8 of an inch. And I'm going to use a zipper foot to get right in close to help me. Okay, so as you can see, it was all clipped and the gusset fits the bag, so don't be alarmed if it doesn't at first. And I'm going to sew this with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance using my zipper foot to get in nice and close to the bag. So with that sewn, I'm then going to place on our back panel, and I've opened up the zipper because obviously we're going to need to turn it the right way out. So we're going to line up just like we did before, the top and the bottom, the 2 sides, and I'm going to snip into the gusset to help me have the gusset fit that outer back panel. Then once it's all clipped, I'm going to sew it on the machine, again with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now I'm going to take it over to the machine, sew it around just like I did before with a 1 centimetre seam allowance and using my zipper foot. Okay, so with both sides sewn, it's time to do the binding. Now there are a few different ways to do binding on bags. I'm going to take you through one method. But to start with, we need to even out the layers ahead of the binding. So we're going to cut off any excess through those layers, and we're going to find this especially on the corners. This is going to help us have a really nice even binding and make our lives easier, which is never a bad thing. Okay, so with that done, and this is totally optional, but I recommend, especially if you're newer to binding, to zigzag over the edge of the layers to keep them all together. You'll want to sew with your needle just past the fabric and then going into the fabric to catch the edge and stop any layers getting bunched up and sewing incorrectly. Okay, now onto the binding. Now I'm just going to show you one method of binding bags, but if you're interested in taking a deep dive into different techniques, there is a full masterclass inside the 77 Club, which you can find details for in the description below. Now I'm using homemade binding that is actually cut on the bias or diagonal to give it stretch, and we need this to go around the corners nicely. I've used a tool to make this, but you can buy pre-made bias tape also. So we're going to find the bottom middle of one side and place the bias tape opened and right sides together, starting in the middle. I like to place a couple of clips to keep it in place, but I don't personally clip all the way around because I like to adjust it as I sew, but you could also clip it all the way around before you sew if you prefer. Now when it comes to sewing, we're going to start just a little bit way down from that edge because we want to have a little bit of an overlap, as you'll see when we come round to kind of getting to the end of the sewing. So I'm going to cut off the end of the bias tape there just to keep it straight and neat and make our lives a bit easier when we are sewing. Then we're going to stitch in the ditch or fold of the bias binding all the way around with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and this should be a hair's width next to the original line of stitching, but ideally not on top of it. As you can see, I'm sticking with that zipper foot, and like I say, I've started around about an inch from the edge, and I'm going to sew all the way around, sewing in that fold, that first fold of the bias tape, a hair's width from the original stitching just next to it. This is going to add strength to that seam, and it's going to stop splitting the stitches by sewing directly on top of it. And you may wonder why we're sewing this way up to begin with, which is slightly harder, and that is because when we come to do the other side, when we bend and fold the bias tape around to the other side, it's going to be a little bit easier to sew from the kind of gusset side and make our lives easier to get that fold really nice and a really professional look. Okay, now that we're getting to the beginning of our binding, I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to cut off just about an inch overlap. Then I'm going to fold it under so that it's wrong sides together. So we've got that little edge there. And I'm going to place that underneath that first bit so that the first bit is over the top of the last bit. And then I'm going to continue sewing on and finish where I started. So with that bias now all attached, we are going to, I'm just going to get rid of those extra threads, grab my clips. We are going to pull the bias binding round to the other side. So now we are going around to this side. So we're going to pull it up and we're going to make sure it's folded because we've obviously got that fold. Fold it round to the gusset side. And you can be a bit lenient with your fold there, can over or kind of unfold it and make it go so that it covers up your stitching. And then we're going to pop some clips in and we're going to clip it all the way round this time. So that's all clipped up. I'm going to take that over to my machine and I'm going to sew it this time going from the gusset side down. And you may want to move up to a jeans 110 needle for this. You're going through a lot of layers. Take it slow round those curves. As long as you're sewing past that initial stitch line, you should be totally fine. So you can err on like a couple of millimeters from your folded edge on the inside, and you will catch that side and it will look good on the other side. It's always good to do this in the same colour thread as your bias binding. I'm not, so that hopefully you can see it. If you're worried about getting this neat, first of all, I would say it's on the inside of the bag, so don't worry too much because you'll find that you're never going to see it. But also you could hand stitch this closed as a different option. So with that side of the binding done, we're then going to repeat the process on the other side, laying down the bias binding, stitching it one side, flipping it over, clipping it, and then stitching the other side. Okay, so I've bound both of the edges of the bag and then it's ready to turn through. So of course we've got our zip open at the top. We're just going to reach through, turn the bag the whole way out so it's the right side facing out. Woohoo, you did it! You finished your Vicky May. All there is left to do is to attach your straps and you're ready to go. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget as well to check out the other Vicky May options, which you can find on your screen right now. I'll see you on the next video.